Greetings, grade 11. We are moving on to the 6th lesson in our lessons on rivers. Today, we are going to be looking at the land features that we are likely to find in the middle course of the fluvial cycle. Now, as we know, by this time our mature river has left the mountains and it is now flowing across land that is less steep. Because of this reduced gradient, our mature river flows with a little less energy than it had previously, and as a result of this, it begins to deposit more. Now, a mature river performs two processes. It still continues to erode, but it also now starts to deposit. Because of this, we see different landforms forming along the mature river. Let's see what these landforms are. We start to see the creation of small floodplains in the mature river. Now we all know what floodplains are. Floodplains are the flat, fertile land that you find next to the river. In fact, I can actually show you on this photograph, and you will actually see that the floodplains are these slightly lighter appearing land next to the river, and they go all the way along the path of that particular river. Now, because this mature river is flowing on land that is less steep and it's therefore flowing with a whole lot less energy, it's depositing and laying down the sand or the silt on the side of the river. And certainly when this river goes into flood, it will spread that silt further afield and create those floodplains. Now, the other thing we know about a mature river is that it starts to form a meandering canal pattern. Because of the reduced gradient of the land, the river now starts to weave and wind across the land, forming loop-like bends. This photograph shows the meandering canal pattern of the mature river very nicely. Can you see how it's winding from side to side? The other reason that I liked this photograph was that it also shows you the small floodplains that are starting to form. Can you see that sand, or that silt, or alluvium as we call it, that is forming on the side there? Because the river is meandering, we start to see two different river banks. We see an inner bank and we see an outer bank. Oh my goodness, look at that heading. I think I got a little bit over exuberant about the ends over there. Anyway, bear with me. All right, let's begin by looking at the inner bank. I'm going to show you by drawing a red cross. There we see the first inner bank. And there is the second inner bank. Now the inner bank is the area of the river where the river flows slowly. So it flows slowly around the inner bank, causing the river to deposit silt and sand on the inner banks. And that is why when you look at those inner banks, you can see that they are gentle, sandy slopes that create the inner bank. The other bank I want you to look at would be the outer bank. So I'm going to show you the outer banks by drawing a blue cross. So here's one outer bank. If we go over here, there is our second outer bank. And in actual fact, here we even have a third outer bank. Right, so at those blue crosses are our outer banks. Now, looking at the arrow over here that is showing the flow of the river, what this arrow is trying to show us is that the river flows quite quickly around the outer bank. And because it flows quickly with a lot of energy, it has the energy to erode the outer bank, creating a steep bank. Do you see over here how steep the bank is? Now these two photographs are fantastic to show you what I have just been explaining to you. Look at the photograph at the top. That is a photograph of an outer bank of a river. Now look how fast the river is flowing around that outer bank. You can see the turbulent white water. And because that river is flowing with so much energy, it erodes the outer bank, creating a steep bank. We therefore call the outer bank the cut bank. Now that makes absolute sense to me, because I think it makes sense to call it the cut bank because the river is cutting into the land as it erodes it. Look at the photograph below. Now that's a photograph of the inner bank of a river. Do you notice the sandy banks? That is because as the river is moving slowly around the inner bank, it deposits the silt, creating a gentle, sandy bank. We therefore can call the inner bank of a river the slip-off slope. That again makes sense to me because I think that the silt slips off the river as it gets left behind. We all know that another land feature we are always going to find within a mature valley is a U-shaped valley. As the river is meandering from side to side, the river starts to erode the valley on the sides. Have a look over there where in the photograph I've indicated the two red arrows over there showing how the river is eroding the sides of the valley, causing lateral erosion. This of course forms a wider valley which is U-shaped. And once again, let's see, I want to show you on this photograph if you can actually pick up the U in the shape of that valley. If we go up there, you can more or less see what I'm saying when I say it's a U-shaped valley. Now, a very, very interesting feature found along a mature river is very often, and they're not that common, we can see an alluvial fan. Now, an alluvial fan is formed when a very heavily loaded river, by that I mean the river is full of sand and silt, when it's flowing from a high area, from a high-lying steep area, where I've printed those words, and the river flows fast down this high-lying area and it flows down onto a very flat piece of land. And as this river flows quickly down the steep-sided mountain, so it deposits all that silt and sand that it was carrying in the shape of a fan. So an alluvial fan is a fan-shaped or a cone-shaped deposit of sediment. Now obviously as the river is flowing here, as I'm showing, it's going to find it quite difficult to work its way through the silt, and therefore the river splits up into separate canals to work its way through the silt. Here is a photograph of an alluvial fan. Now I'd like to introduce you to a feature known as an apex. Now the apex is the narrow point at the start of the alluvial fan, where I've just drawn my red cross. Can you see how pointed it is? And then, of course, all of this deposit over here is all of the silt and the alluvium that is deposited. Now, the particles that are found near the apex of the alluvial fan are quite big and coarse. But then the particles that are deposited at the end of the alluvial fan are very, very fine and small. Now, areas where we find alluvial fans are actually quite popular for farming, for I think obvious reasons. For one thing, the area is flat, so it makes it very easy for the farmer to plant his crops. And for another, all that silt makes it a very fertile area, and also moist because of the river working its way through that silt. Here's a great photograph. This is a photograph showing us something known as a bajada, or it can also be known as a Piedmont alluvial plain. Now this is an area where 2 or more alluvial fans are found. Have a look. Here's one alluvial fan, and here's another alluvial fan. So that's pretty cool, a bajada. Right, well that brings us to the end. It's not a long lesson today. So just in summary, we must remember that your mature river flowing over a reduced gradient flows with a little less energy, and therefore it starts to deposit. But do remember that a mature river performs 2 processes. Half the time it's depositing, and the other half of the time it's eroding.